Not only did legendary writer Roald Dahl create unforgettable characters, but he also put words of wisdom into their mouths. In his children's classic, The Twits, we read this: "A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth, but if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely." There's a lot of truth in these words, for lovely thoughts inside create a lovely appearance outside. That is human nature. Now, some people's faces give away what they are thinking more than others. I think I'm one of them. But ultimately, there are only two people who know exactly what fills your mind: you and God. You live with your thoughts 24/7. And because of this, your thoughts can either hold you captive or set you free. In Paul's letters to the churches found in the New Testament, we see lots of teaching about our thoughts and our mind. In his letter to the Christians in Philippi, Paul writes this: "Summing it all up, friends, I'd say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Put into practice what you learned from me, what you heard and saw and realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into his most excellent harmonies." The reality of living as broken people in a broken world is that we could consume our mind entirely with darkness and negativity. There is enough sadness on earth that we could think about the worst of humanity and life all day long. That is a choice we could make. But that is not the choice Paul calls us to make. That is not what God wants our minds to be filled with. Because despite the darkness, the light shines brighter. Despite the pain, healing does come. Despite the fear, peace is real. I have friends who have chosen to limit the amount of news they watch because of the anxiety and sadness it brings. If we choose to base our perception of the world purely on what we see on the news, our thoughts will be negative and painful. But the reason bad stuff makes it onto the news is because it is unusual. Kind, loving, compassionate people and hopeful, exciting, lovely events are the everyday reality of life on earth. God calls us to focus on the good things. Not in a way which encourages ignorance of the tragedy and brokenness of some events on earth, but in a way which recognises the power of goodness and the goodness of God. We get to choose what we give airtime to on our TV, our radio, and our social media. We choose what we watch. In the same way, we can decide what we give airtime to in our minds. Paul speaks of filling our minds and meditating on the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Godfrey Birtle's song, Outrageous Grace, says this: "There's a lot of pain, but a lot more healing. There's a lot of trouble, but a lot more peace. There's a lot of hate, but a lot more loving. There's a lot of sin, but a lot more grace. Oh, outrageous grace, love unfurled by heaven's hand. Oh, outrageous grace, through my Jesus I can stand. There's a lot of fear, but a lot more freedom. There's a lot of darkness, but a lot more light. There's a lot of cloud, but a lot more vision. There's a lot of perishing, but a lot more life. We often speak of changing our mind, whether that is changing our mind on what we have for tea or changing our mind on what job we might have. But in Paul's letter to the church in Rome, he encourages us all to change our minds. Don't copy the behaviour and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. In other translations, this verse encourages you to renew your mind, or let your way of thinking be completely changed, or change the way you think. When we encounter Christ, the way we think about ourselves, life, and the world around us should change. Knowing God reframes our perspective on the world, and that has to change our thoughts. If we know that God is Lord over all things and has us in the palm of his hands, then our thoughts on the things that scare us should be transformed. If we know God created everyone in his image, then our thoughts on other people should be transformed. If we know that God is a good God who created a beautiful world, then our thoughts on life on this earth should be transformed. When Paul talks about meditating on whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, we don't have to search far to find these things. A story is told about a 92-year-old Christian woman who was blind. In spite of her limitation, she was always neatly dressed, with her hair carefully brushed and her makeup tastefully applied. Each morning, she would meet the new day with eagerness. After her husband of 70 years died, it became necessary for her to go to a nursing home to be looked after. On the day of the move, a helpful neighbour drove her there and guided her into the lobby. Her room wasn't ready, so she waited patiently in the lobby for several hours. When a carer finally came for her, she smiled sweetly as she manoeuvred her walker to the elevator. The staff member described her room to her, including the new curtains that had been hung on the windows. "I love it," she declared. "But Mrs. Jones, you haven't been in your room yet," the carer replied. "That doesn't have anything to do with it," she said. "Happiness is something you choose. Whether I like my room or not doesn't depend on how it's arranged. It's how I arrange my mind." What a wonderful attitude to have. She had clearly been listening to Paul's teaching. I loved watching the Platinum Jubilee celebrations last weekend, and one of the highlights, as for many people, were the antics of Prince Louis. His tantrums were particularly amusing, as he had his mind set on doing anything other than he was told to. It was lovely to see him acting like any other 4-year-old. But the issue comes when our negative attitude gets the better of us when we are no longer 4. One of the things which has stuck with me from my days as a cadet was our training principal, Anthony Cottrell, teaching us that your attitude determines your altitude, hence the tenuous link to the giraffe. There is much in life which we do not choose. Our attitude is not one of those things. It's so easy to fall into a critical spirit, where our instinctive reaction is to pick fault with things. The thing is, a critical spirit does nothing other than bring you and others around you down. I love the phrase, "Be an encourager. The world has plenty of critics already." Philippians 2 verse 5 in the Voice paraphrase says this: "Adopt the mindset of Jesus the Anointed. Live with his attitude in your hearts. When we make the decision to be a disciple of Jesus, we not only desire to speak like he would speak, act like he would act, or go where he would go. We also choose to think like he would think. We don't know all the thoughts that crossed Jesus' mind, but we do know what he thought of us, what he thought of life, and what he thought of his Father in heaven. He thought every one of us was worth dying for. That means our thoughts about everyone else should be thoughts of compassion and love. Yeah, I absolutely know how tough that can be at times. He thought that life was a precious gift and life was for living. Jesus said, "I have come so that you might have life in all its fullness." A full life isn't found through focusing our thoughts on darkness, fear, and cynicism. Jesus thought that his Father in heaven was full of love, full of care, and full of strength. If our minds can hold onto the thought that God is full of love, full of care, and full of strength, it can take away the power of the worries that can consume our minds. I recently heard it said that worrying is like praying for something that you don't want to happen. How true is that? In Paul's letter to the Colossians, he writes, "Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things." Paul is not saying forget about everything going on around you, ignore life on earth and get set for heaven. He is saying, don't let your mind get bogged down with the anxieties, negativity, and misguided ways of life on earth. Instead, think of the beauty of Christ. Focus on the wonder of God's love. Count your many blessings and think lovely things. Each time I go on Facebook, I'm confronted with the question, what's on your mind? What we respond with is normally a status about what we're eating for tea, or where we are on holiday, or just a funny video we have seen. But today, let's spend some time reflecting on what really is on our mind. Is it things that are true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not to curse? Or do you really struggle to take your mind off the brokenness of earth and onto the wholeness of Christ? I would encourage you to regularly spend time with God and ask for his help to renew your mind so that you will know what is good, pleasing, and perfect. God bless you.